All right, hi everybody. How are we today?
Well,
Good. Sorry for that ear-shattering noise. Thank you all so much for coming out this evening. My name is Sarah Cawley. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at the Great Falls Public Library, and I'm thrilled to have you all here with us today. We love doing author talks and big events and small events and everything in between. Being at the library is a lot of fun because we get to chat and talk with so many different people on a daily basis. I really enjoy doing all of our programs. I just put up all of our May programming as well, so if you're interested in looking at that, it's all on our billboard upstairs, and I also have, like, these green ones are the rest of our April programming, but I also have pink ones, which are our May programming opportunities. So we have lots happening here at the library all the time. I just want to also showcase we got a new bit of swag in the mail today, and it's super cute, and I designed it, so you should definitely pick one up. It's a checklist of things to do, and right on top, return your GFPL library book.
Right.
That's funny. Okay, anyway, so tonight we have Russell Rowland as our presenter, as our author. Russell lives down in Billings. He has authored a plethora of books that are all here at the library, so you can check them out at any point in time. He has been here in the past, most recently to talk about his book, 56 Counties. And that was just like such a fun talk. So when Melissa reached out and said that she wanted you for book club, I said, heck yeah, and you have a new book. So it kind of was a win-win for all parties involved. So I don't have much else to say, so everybody join me in welcoming Russell.
Thank you. Yes, it's always nice to be here and see some familiar faces. So yeah, I'm going to mostly talk about my new book, which is Be a Man. And it's a memoir, but it's more of a social exploration. The subtitle is Raised in the Shadow of Cowboys. So the focus of the book is basically what it means to grow up in the West as a man. I come from a long line of ranching people in my family, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that first. So great-grandfathers on both sides of my mom's family were homesteaders. One of them was part of the cattle trail from Texas. He ended up in Johnson County down in Wyoming, and when things started to heat up down there, when it looked like there was going to be some violence, he decided to head further north, and that's how he ended up in the Little Missouri part of the state over in southeastern Montana, where he homesteaded. And he started a ranch there that is still in the family, so it's been over 100 years now. And he ended up marrying a woman so there's also a long history of really strong women in my family. He married the first woman to ever own a business in Belfouche, South Dakota. It was a hat shop. So she was a tough frontier woman who basically took care of everything that George didn't feel like doing, which I think has been kind of a tradition in our family. So when I started writing, I was first kind of trying to be universal, like writing about America in general, and I wasn't getting anywhere. But when I started I wrote a story about my grandfather the rancher. He went to borrow a flatbed truck from one of his neighbors one day. And he was a notoriously bad driver. So he goes out, gets in the truck, backs up, runs over 2 sheep and the mailbox, and takes off, not realizing he's killed 2 sheep. So when he went to return the truck, the neighbor was not happy, but he didn't say a word. Typical Montana passive aggressive. So anyway, I wrote this story about my grandfather, and it just sort of opened up the floodgates for me. And I ended up writing this novel, which is very loosely based on the ranch family in southeastern Montana. It's called In Open Spaces. It starts in the early 20th century when one of the brothers in this ranching family drowns, which actually happened to my grandfather. His older brother drowned. My grandfather left school. He was in 8th grade and went back to the ranch to work. You know, spent the rest of his life there. Never once complained about having to leave school, even though he loved school. So anyway, you know, I really wanted to, what really triggered this book was I was going through some personal turmoil in my own life. I was going through a divorce, trying to figure things out, going to therapy and, you know, getting all this help. And my grandmother died, and I was thinking about her life and how she went through way more than I ever will, you know. She was widowed 3 times. They were traveling down the highway one night when she was probably in her 60s, and there was a guy pulling a haystacker with the teeth facing backwards with no lights, and they ran into this machine. One of the teeth went right through the car, through her leg, and broke her leg. They told her she'd never walk again. Of course she did. She was one of those kind of ranch women. So anyway, I just was completely fascinated by how my grandparents lived in this place in the middle of nowhere. They didn't have telephones until the 50s. I think they got electricity maybe in the 40s. I can't remember for sure. But the fact that they had, you know, they were miles from the nearest neighbor. My grandmother didn't even drive. So I wanted to try to capture what it was like for those people to live in that environment and how they managed to get through it, you know. And so I interviewed a bunch of old timers that were still alive in that region. Got a lot of amazing stories from those people, and you know, tried to do the best I could to capture that part of Montana history through my family. And I just want to read a brief passage that sort of emulates what I found when I talked to these people and what I saw growing up too, you know. So this takes place just after the drowning. In our country, there is a quietness, a silence that surrounds you and fills you up, beating inside like blood until it becomes a part of you. The prairie is quiet even during the day, except for the sounds of work, the snort of horses, the clang of a plow's blade against rock, and the rhythm of hooves pounding the ground. But these sounds drift off into the air, finding nothing to contain them. There are no echoes. It's quieter still at night when you can sit for hours at a stretch and hear nothing except the crickets or the occasional cluck of a chicken. At night, the darkness seems to add to the silence, making it heavier, somehow more imposing. It's a silence that can be too much for some, especially people who aren't fond of their own company. And it seems that living in such silence makes you think twice before speaking or laughing or crying, because when sounds are that scarce, they carry more weight. So like most people I know, we Arbuckles don't say much, especially in times of tragedy when no one knows what to say anyway. When something leaves us wondering, we mostly sit and stare off across the prairie as if someone might come along and explain a few things. This stoic silence does not come naturally to some people. In those early homestead days, it led to frequent cases of the loneliness or suicide. And although most of us talked about these conditions as if they only happened to newcomers, we all knew better. we all lived with a constant awareness of how vulnerable we were, all of us. It didn't take a genius to notice that some of the most sturdy had been broken down by the pervasive weight of unpredictable weather, uncooperative livestock, and more than anything, the silent wondering about all these byproducts of life on the prairie. So that book came out a little more than 20 years ago, and I had an uncle who was my godfather. He was also my mentor, one of my favorite people. And he, one of the things that he used to do, he was really excited that I became a writer, so he was always trying to come up with ideas for books for me. And one of the ideas he came up with was, he says, you know, you should go to every county in Montana and write about it. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, so it didn't make much sense logistically, but I did like the idea. And I was dating a woman who was an editor at the time, and I told her about it, and she said, nobody would buy that book. So I gave up on it because she was the expert. But when I moved back to Montana, I moved back here in 2007, and that idea just kept popping up in my brain, and you know, it especially became intriguing to me because I realized I didn't know Montana as well as I thought I did. You know, I'd been gone for a long time. Montana had changed. I had changed. I was in my 40s. So I finally decided, you know, I had a publisher that published one of my novels. I approached him with the idea. And he said, oh man, I would publish that book in a heartbeat. So when I got that little boost of confidence, I started my journey and went to every county, interviewed people all over the state, read as many books as I could get my hands on about the history of Montana, and wrote this book, I guess about 10 years ago. And it was just an amazing adventure. One of the things that was interesting about it was I didn't really know how to structure it. I started by writing a chapter for each county, and I was bored to tears. It felt like a travel guide, and that was not exactly what I had in mind at all. So I was kind of stumped for a while, and I finally decided to try grouping the counties into the industry that was the most prominent in that county. So I have a chapter about the railroad, I have a chapter about ranching, I have a chapter about farming, timber, mining, of course. And it was very interesting to see how all these sort of boom and bust patterns play out in every single industry that Montana has. So yeah, this was such a fun book, and it has led to a radio show that I do on Yellowstone Public Radio, where I still interview people about stuff they're doing around the state. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the introduction of this book. I have a secret to share with you. It's about this whole Montana mystique, the magic of this place. I've lived in 12 different states in the past 30 years, and I've always been amazed by how people react when they hear I'm from Montana. Not always, of course. Some people can't even place Montana. They usually know it's near Canada, and others see it as just another small part of that big empty space between New York and California. But I often came across people who said, oh, I love Montana. Have you been there? I asked. No, but it looks so beautiful in the pictures. I've always wanted to go. And of course there are the inevitable questions, sometimes entirely baffling. A friend of mine was recently asked, do you have grocery stores there? Montana is a place whose vast expanses are really impossible to comprehend until you've been here. I was recently talking to someone who works at the wind farms in Wheatland County, and he told me about the owner of the company coming from Chicago to visit the work site. He said he would just catch a cab from the airport in Billings. I said, I don't think you want to do that. So he asked me whether there was a train, and I said, no, tell you what, I'll just come and pick you up. Another friend tells a story about when he first moved to Montana and they had to drive to Great Falls for business. This guy was giving me directions, and he said to turn left at Eddie's Corner. So I asked him what that was. He said, oh, it's a gas station. I thought, wait, I'm driving over 200 miles to get to this town. I'm supposed to pick out one gas station to know where to turn? But of course, when I got to Eddie's Corner, it made complete sense. For decades, the West, and Montana in particular, has developed a reputation as a place where you can go to start over, to create a whole new persona, or become the person you always envisioned. It's the kind of place where a week-long trip to one of the more picturesque locales fuels the imagination. The fresh air, the huge sky, and the wide open space instills in you a belief that anything is possible. It's a place where starting over can move from concept to reality in the course of a walk around Bozeman or a drive along Flathead Lake. But here's the secret. The secret is that we Montanans are completely bipolar. That's right, we're up and down like a goddamn bucking horse. Not all of us, of course, but as a state, as one big entity, we are completely manic depressive. Why do I say that? Well, in February of 2014, Gallup did a survey to determine the happiest states in America. Montana finished first. That's the Montana we all know. That's the idea you get when you visit this place. People are friendly as hell. They really do seem happy. You rarely get that shiver up your spine where the friendliness seems to be hiding some slimy ulterior motive. People in Montana let you go first because it doesn't matter whether they go first. They smile at you on the street because there's no good reason not to. But here's the other side of it. That same year, several studies listed Montana in the top 3 for suicide. And for the last 40 years, we've been in the top 5 every single year. So what the hell does that mean? How is that possible? Let's see, many wonderful journalists and historians have told this story before, and this is intended as just one more contribution to the growing narrative of this place. It's just one man's take on the contradictions and complexities that are Montana, because a story this big and this complicated needs to be told over and over again. Well, thank you. One of the things that has become very apparent to me the longer I'm back in Montana, and the more I think about my history here, and the history of my family, is that I did not learn how to cope with life as a man. And I didn't have a lot of good role models as far as people who took things on directly, who talked about stuff. You know, we have a long history of men who are really good at getting things done, but when it comes to conversation or conflict or dealing with disappointment or anger or whatever emotional issues they may have, we just didn't have a lot of skills there. So the main reason I wrote this book, and it took me 20 years, was because I wanted to explore my own journey with that issue, but also the journey that my family, that I watched them go through. My father was an alcoholic. He eventually got sober. So we ended up having a pretty awesome relationship in our later years. He was sober for 30 years when he died. So I was very fortunate to have that time with him. But a lot of people don't get that, especially in Montana. So that's what this book is about, and I'm going to read a few short sections from it, and hopefully you'll have some questions. So one of the things that one of my favorite things that my dad ever did, his dad was kind of a dreamer, but he never really was able to accomplish any of the things that he wanted to do. His main goal in life was to be a rancher, and he worked as a ranch hand, but he was never able to get anywhere with that. So when I was about 10, my dad was teaching school in Sheridan, Wyoming, and he saw an ad for a ranch manager in the Bighorn Valley, and he went and applied for this job, interviewed for the job, got the job, quit his teaching job, and then told my mom. Because he knew she would be very unhappy. She did not like living on a ranch as a kid. She never wanted to live on a ranch again. So he knew she would be mad, and she was. It was a very miserable 2 years that we spent on this ranch. And it turned out to be even worse because the guy that hired him, I don't know if you guys have heard of Peter Kiewit. He was one of the biggest construction people in the country. He built the BART system in San Francisco, among other things. He owned this ranch, so he didn't live there. He lived in Omaha. And he left my dad in charge of these guys who were like, who the hell is this school teacher that's our new boss? So they were not cooperative. So it was a very bad 2 years. Anyway, I'm going to read a couple sections from our time on the ranch there. My dad's dad died about a year after we moved there, and this is about that. It's called 6 Men in Black Suits. I stand in the cemetery just outside Casper, Wyoming, surrounded by sobbing relatives, and I wonder why I don't feel like crying. In front of this small gathering, my father and his 5 brothers stand in a row, the pallbearers at their own father's funeral. They all wear black suits with skinny ties, their hands locked in front of them, 6 handsome young men, hair still black, all clearly brothers, and not a single one of them sheds a tear. My grandfather, Earl Rowland, was a silent man, not just quiet, silent. I have no memory of him speaking to me or my siblings. I have no memory of him playing with us or telling us a story. I have no memory of him scolding us. The one memory I do have is one day being in the front yard of the trailer where he and my grandmother lived, just the 2 of us, him sitting in a lawn chair with a glass of lemonade, his forehead slightly moist with sweat. I remember watching him from the corner of my eye, wondering whether he would say anything. But he didn't. It was as if he didn't realize I was there. So I'm confused, standing among my relatives, wondering what I missed. Some of my cousins are wailing, heartbroken. I'm still not sure to this day whether they experienced a different Grandpa Rowland than I did, or whether they were just caught up in the moment. But I focused on those 6 young men in front of me, deciding from their expressions that being a grown-up must mean that tragic things don't hurt you. When you grow up around men who never talk, men who never offer guidance, you look for small signals to decipher what it means to be a man. It wasn't conscious, but I learned to look for any sign at all about how to behave, how to treat women, how to deal with pain and anger, and disappointment and fear. I feel as if I spent most of my childhood wishing one of these men would crouch down and explain something to me, anything at all. Maybe it's part of what made me a writer, this compulsion to study people, searching for signs. On that day, I came to the unfortunate conclusion that I was like my dad and his brothers. My grandfather, Rowland, was only 58 years old when cancer took his life, And I had enough conversations with my dad in later years to know that he did feel something that day. And a lot of what he felt was sadness about what might have been, about what his father missed out on by living in such silence and solitude. Even so, for much of his life, my father emulated his father. And I have many memories with my dad that are similar to the one in my grandfather's front yard, wondering whether he would speak, wondering whether he noticed I was even there. This is also from the 2 years on the ranch. It's called Critters. I sit on the ground with my arm draped around the neck of Molly, the Galloway calf my Grandpa Arbuckle gifted me for a 4-H project. The strong aromas of ranch life, hay and manure and fresh grass hang in the air, and I bury my hands in Molly's thick, dusty coat. I'm surprised how easily I've developed a rhythm with Molly, who I plan to show at the Sheridan County Fair at the end of the summer. Although I spent a couple of years in 4-H when we lived in Sheridan, my specialty in town was wood and leather. This is my first experience with livestock. I stand, and Molly rises with me as if we are of one mind. I lead her around the corral with the nylon halter, a tangle of green and white nylon that I slip over her nose as if I am an old, experienced rancher. There's a misconception about ranching and farming being a simple life, that you follow a certain routine every year, planting, harvesting, breeding, calving, etc. The truth is that it's impossible to survive in that world. Uh-oh. Without being open to new ideas. Farming and ranching require constant study of soil health, fertilizing, fighting weeds and disease. It requires compromise and innovation. For several weeks, I tend to Molly with the kind of attention I've never shown any hobby before, filling her black rubber feeding tub with alfalfa cake every morning, complementing that with a few flakes of hay. I start working on the basic elements of the routine for the fair, leading her around the corral, my boots sinking into the soft mud, her nose occasionally snuffing my shoulder. I love brushing her. Galloway cattle have thick, wavy black hair, much finer than the hair on a Hereford or an Angus, so it often gets tangled. Then one day, I tromp out to the barn for my usual routine, filling the rubber tub with alfalfa cake. I duck into the corral where I bend down to set it on the ground. But when I straighten up, there is Molly coming right toward me, her head lowered, her eyes huge and angry. I see her just in time to run to the fence where I hop up on the top rail, out of reach. But I'm shaking. I sit on the fence for a bit, watching as she makes her way to the feed and chomps away. Then I lower myself into the corral and approach. But when she gives me that same look, lowering her head again, I quickly depart. There's an unwritten rule in the West, although it may as well be branded into every page of every story ever written about us. It may as well be posted above every door, stitched into every pillowcase, stamped on every saddle and belt and wallet. It is expected that if you fall off the horse or get hit by the pitch or get pushed down, you get up back on your feet. You will not give up. It is bored into our heads from the time we understand language that to turn away from anything frightening is a sign of cowardice. It is the measure of a man. So, for days after this, I tried. I went to the barn, I filled the rubber tub, I eased the barn door open, and if Molly was far enough from the door, I bolted into the corral and dropped the tub to the ground. I tried bringing our Australian blue heeler, Midge, to provide protection, but that didn't help either. The fear was now palpable. Molly could smell it the minute she saw me, and she started charging whenever my face appeared. I became a shivering mess every time I tried to feed her, and I knew it was my own fault, but I couldn't stop it. My mother hit me with the predictable reminder that Grandpa Arbuckle would be ashamed. But of course, course, the longer it went on, the more ashamed I became. I finally reached the day where I couldn't go anywhere near the corral. My father took over feeding duties until we could make arrangements to return the calf to my grandpa, and my 4-H career came to a quiet, sad end. Is it crazy to say that that calf broke my heart? There are unexpected benefits of growing up in this place, besides the natural metaphors we experience every day by sharing this land with creatures and crops. We often come face to face with a world that features completely different priorities. After a year of realizing that being the smartest kid in my one-room school didn't matter, or that beating my brains against the wall to try to get approval from these kids was never going to work, I had pictured myself strolling into the fairground with Molly trotting behind, her blue-black coat combed and shiny, a blue ribbon around her neck. In a country ruled by Red Angus, I knew I would have the only Galloway, which would almost guarantee some kind of recognition. I had not only developed a real affection for Molly, I saw her as a meal ticket to finding some measure of approval in this new place, this community where I couldn't find a foothold. So her rejection was more than a heartbreak. It was one more indication that I was never going to get it right here. I couldn't even feed a goddamn calf. Okay, one more from this time period. This is called If You Don't Know What's Wrong With You. In 1968, a father of 3 drove 25 miles from the X-Bar X Ranch to Sheridan, Wyoming. He parked his green International Harvester in the parking lot of the VA, entered the building, and approached the front desk. When the receptionist asked why he was there, he said, "I need to talk to someone." "What's wrong?" she asked. "I don't know what's wrong. I just need to talk to someone." "Well, sir, if you don't know why you're here, there's nothing we can do to help you." This young man was my father. He was 35. It had been 2 years since he quit his teaching job to manage the X-Bar X Ranch. My father was a handsome young man, bearing a slight resemblance to Jack Nicholson in his Chinatown days. But unlike Jack, Dad was also one of the least assertive people I've ever known, even when he was at his best. So when that woman told him they couldn't help him, my father left the building, sank onto the steps, and dissolved into tears. With today's increased awareness about mental health, it's hard to imagine this playing out today. And looking back on it, it's baffling that this woman responded with such a cold heart. He was clearly crying out for help. My father told me years later it was the closest he ever came to leaving our family. I'm sure suicide also crossed his mind. And although he eventually recovered some confidence and purpose in his life, he spent the next 20 years lost, meandering from one unsatisfying job to another, sinking into a quiet battle with alcohol and withdrawing step by step from our family. Okay, let's read something a little cheerier here. So when I was 16, I went and worked on my grandparents' ranch for the summer, which was an incredible experience. And of course I learned some very valuable lessons because it was my first job, and working on a ranch is a good place to learn a lot of good lessons. So this, if I can find it, was one of the better lessons I learned. I worked for my uncle while I was there, and the uncle I mentioned before, he was my boss. My grandpa was a little too old to work in the fields anymore. Uncle Lee rousted me at sunrise, and after a hearty breakfast, we would drive out to the fields while there was still a golden glow on the horizon. And we would either spend the entire day stacking hay or moving cattle, docking sheep, or fixing fence. It was my first job, and it's hard to imagine a better introduction to the world of work, in a place where you observe life and death and the danger of the elements. Working on a ranch is not the life for someone who doesn't pay attention to the world around them, because the slightest misstep can not only lead to injury to yourself, but it can also put other people or animals at risk. There's no room for excuses. One evening we came in from the fields and my Aunt Maggie said, Dan Oliver called. There's 2 bulls in the Washburn place. They broke through the fence. They're in his pasture. In the world of ranching, there is no ambiguity about who is responsible in this situation. Lee turned to me. Russell, you need to go out there tomorrow morning and get those bulls, but you'll need to fix the fence first so they don't just bust through again. You know where it is? I nod. The next morning, Aunt Maggie fixes me a lunch, complete with a big jug of ice water that will be warm by lunchtime. I saddle up Stinger and Lee fixes me up with the fencing bag, and I ride away from the barn. It's late morning by the time I get to the fence separating our property from Oliver's, where I see a big gap, the barbed wire on the ground in a tangle, and I spot the bulls staring at me with complete indifference. I dig the staples and tools from the fencing bag and go to work stapling the barbed wire back to the fence posts. Thankfully, the posts are not damaged, so it's just a matter of getting everything strung back together. And then I go to tackle the hard part of the job. I open the nearest gate. I approach the bulls, who still show little interest in my presence. The way they look at me gives me the distinct impression that they recognize a rookie from miles away. So I approach with as much confidence as I can muster, repeating what I've seen my grandfather and Lee do when they work with cows, waving my hat and shouting, "Hey!" They continue to ignore me for a while, but having a good stock horse can make up for a lack of experience. And when Stinger starts dancing behind them, they finally start to lumber away, still in no hurry. Thanks to Stinger, I eventually push the bulls over to the fence line, then along the fence line to the corner where the gate is. Even then, they stubbornly circle behind me before finally strolling through. I close the gate and then sit in my saddle for a while and eat my sandwich and apple, sucking down warm water, feeling satisfied with a job well done. Once I finish my lunch, it's midday, and I know that there will still be time to go back out into the fields again, so I begin a meandering trip back to the barn. About 15 minutes in, I turn to admire my work one last time, only to see that those goddamn bulls are in the process of trampling the fence in the exact same spot, lumbering back into Oliver's pasture. I sit on Stinger's back and I glare at them as if they will suddenly change their minds. And I'm embarrassed to admit that my first impulse is to ride back to the house and claim everything was just fine when I left. But I've been on the ranch long enough to know who will have to get up early the next morning and do the same thing over again. So after cutting loose with a few choice swear words, I turn Stinger around and repeat the same routine, adding a few more staples and pushing the bulls further into the pasture. I return home just in time for dinner. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions about the book, about writing?
I'm not sure how to ask this question, but I'm just fascinated by the book Be a Man, because it seems like there's a wide breadth of men who would enjoy those stories and relate. How do you, well, marketing isn't exactly what I'm asking, but who's your audience? How do you get it to young men and ingratiate those ideas to them?
Yeah, well, one of the things I realized after the fact was that some people are going to think this is a guidebook, which was, obviously not the idea. But yeah, the audience, I didn't write it just for men. I think a lot of women struggle with the same issues. A lot of women struggle with the men in their lives and want to understand better what's going on with them. So, yeah, I mean, I've been doing a lot of traveling around, and I have a little bit of a presence on the internet, so I've been trying to get the word out that way. But thankfully, a bigger publisher has picked this book up, and they're going to put it out again in the fall. So hopefully the word will get out to a broader audience.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
pretty
really
thrilled
nice.
about that. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah, I actually went to this is when I realized people were getting the wrong idea. I did a reading in Butte, and this woman came in with her husband, and I knew something was up when she sat in front of him. He was the row behind her. And she was like that. She was loaded for bear. And I did my thing, and and then when I got to the question and answer thing, she goes, "This was not what I expected." And it turned out she thought I was gonna, give some talk about how to act more manly.
She wanted you to be her therapist.
Well, no, I
Not
think she was gonna
therapist.
take me down for being such a jerk, So yeah, it was kind of funny.
That is funny.
Yes.
What's one of the interesting facts you wrote about Cascade County in your 52 counties?
56 counties.
56.
Let me think. Ken, do you remember? Trying to remember what I did. So it's been 10 years ago, so.
Well, industry here has changed.
Yeah.
From even 10 years ago.
Probably so, yeah. What is it now? It's more,
The military.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I did write about, one of the things that was really interesting to me was the jazz history here.
Oh, okay.
So I wrote about that. Yeah, in fact, I wrote quite a bit about that whole.
Would you repeat that, what you just said? that
The
you
jazz scene here in Great Falls.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That is what I heard.
It was huge. Mainly because of the bass, But there was a lot of really great jazz musicians that came here to play.
Yeah.
What is one thing that you hope people walk away with your latest book?
Well, the main thing is that it's not a sign of weakness to admit that you need help. I've been through treatment for alcoholism. I had struggles with anger issues. I've done a shitload of therapy, and I just think there's a stigma here in Montana about that, and so a lot of what I talk about is just trying to break that down and give people permission to recognize that it's not a crime to have struggles and to be, to not have the answers. When I did 56 counties, there was one psychiatrist east of Billings in the entire state. And I think that's improved a lot now, especially since COVID, but yeah. I think it's just, the amount of resources that are available to people here is just kind of pathetic.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a question?
I was adding on to that. I just did a podcast about women's healthcare resources here.
Oh.
I was like, oh my gosh. But one thing you talked about was the manic depressiveness of Montana.
Mm.
I wonder